The slap came so fast I didn't even see her hand move. 1 second, my glasses were seated firmly on my face, the world rendered in the soft, expensive amber glow of the Harborview Country Club ballroom. The next, they were skidding across the polished mahogany floor, one lens spiderwebbing as it caught the light of a $3,000 chandelier. The music didn't just stop, it died mid-note, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing the air out of my lungs. 150 people stared. I could feel the heat radiating from their gazes, some filled with pity, others with the kind of twisted excitement people get when they witness a car wreck. My cheek burned, a sharp, stinging fire that pulsed in time with my heartbeat, but the real pain was deeper. It was a cold, jagged ache right under my ribs, the kind of hurt you only get when the person holding the knife is someone you would have died for. That's what you get for being so incredibly selfish, Martin, my daughter-in-law spat. Brianna stood there, a vision in white lace and crystals, her bouquet still clutched in one hand, while the other remained raised, trembling slightly from the force of the strike. She looked beautiful, like a porcelain doll, but her eyes were twin points of cold, hard steel. A man your age doesn't need a 4-bedroom lake house to himself, she continued, her voice rising to reach the back of the room. She wanted everyone to hear. She wanted this to be a public execution. Stop clinging to the past, and give Logan the keys. We're your family. We are the ones who are going to be taking care of you when you finally lose your mind completely. The least you can do is give us a place to start our lives. I looked for my son. Logan was standing just 2 feet away, close enough to smell the expensive lilies in Brianna's bouquet, close enough to see the way my hands were shaking as I reached for my broken glasses. He didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just stared somewhere over my left shoulder, his jaw locked so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He looked like a man watching a movie he didn't particularly like, as if this scene belonged to a different family entirely. I crouched down, my fingers groping against the cold floor. My vision was a blur of expensive shoes, silk chair legs, and the white edge of the dance floor. A guest, one of Brianna's wealthy cousins, I think slid his chair back an inch, making sure the glass from my lens didn't touch his Italian leather loafers. Someone whispered, "Oh wow." Someone else cleared their throat, the sound suspiciously like a stifled laugh. "You're not welcome here anymore," Brianna said, her voice now bright and clear, as if she were giving a toast instead of an eviction notice. "Logan and I are starting our life. We need privacy. We need space. Your place is just sitting there, rotting with memories of a woman who isn't coming back. It would be perfect for us while we find something better. Now, please, leave." I found the frames. One lens was gone, lost somewhere under a table of half-eaten prime rib. I slid them onto my face anyway, the world tilting at a sickening angle through the cracked glass. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bar. I looked exactly like the man I'd spent 30 years pretending to be. An old suit, 5 years out of style. A cheap tie I'd bought at a department store sale, shoulders rounded by years of physical labor. Harmless, ordinary, easy to overlook. My name is Martin Cole. I'm 69 years old. To the people in this room, I'm a widower, a retired school janitor who spent his life pushing a mop down high school hallways. Around town, I'm the guy who still fixes leaky faucets for $20 and a slice of peach pie. I buy my flannels off the clearance rack at the feed store. I drive an old Ford pickup that leaks oil on Logan's pristine driveway. And judging by the way my son was looking through me, that's all I was to him too. A man on a meager pension, rattling around in a house he didn't deserve, a relic of a life he wanted to forget. But there was a version of the story they didn't know. Before I was the man with the mop, I was a man with a plan. My wife Ellen used to say, "Invisible money lets you sleep, Martin. Flashy money just brings the wolves." We chose sleep. For 3 decades, while I quietly cleaned up after teenagers, I was also quietly buying the parts of this town that nobody else wanted. Tax liens on overgrown lots, dilapidated storefronts, and forgotten acreage. I moved in the shadows of the real estate market, building a fortress of brick and mortar that no one could see. The wolves had finally arrived, and they were wearing wedding dresses. For months, Brianna had been sanding me down. It started with the polished insults comments about how my truck was rustic or how my house smelled like old people and dust. Then came the brochures. Senior living facilities with names like the Golden Sunset or Evergreen Meadows, left accidentally on my kitchen table. Then the suggestions that I was getting confused, that I was forgetting things I'd never forgotten. I'd watched Logan start to echo her. "Dad, it's not safe for you out there alone," he'd say, using her exact phrasing. You'd be happier somewhere with people your age. The house is just... It's a lot, Dad. It's too much for you. Their concern always seemed to stop exactly at my property line. Poor man. A woman whispered behind me now. I recognized her as one of Brianna's bridesmaids. He looks so lost. She's right, though. That house is wasted on one person. Each sentence landed like grit between my teeth. The air in the ballroom felt thin and sharp. I slipped my hand into the inside pocket of my blazer, the one Brianna once told me was cute in a Goodwill sort of way, and wrapped my fingers around my phone. There was one number I hadn't dialed in almost a year. A number that represented the life I had kept locked in a vault for Logan's sake. I pressed the call button. Monroe and Associates, this is Carla, came the familiar, steady voice. Carla, it's Martin, I said. My voice surprised me. It wasn't shaking. It was flat, calm, and colder than a Maryland winter. I need you at Harborview, tonight. And I need you to bring the folder we put together last spring. The one marked Final Contingency. There was a short silence on the other end. Carla Monroe had handled my money, my properties, and my secrets for 15 years. She knew exactly which folder I meant. Martin, she said slowly. Are you sure? Once we open that file, there's no going back to the way things were. The mask comes off for good. Across the room, Brianna had already turned away. She was laughing with her bridesmaids again, probably regaling them with the tale of how she finally handled her stubborn father-in-law. Logan stood half a step behind her, a ghost of a man, his smile stretched so tight it looked like it was being held up by wires. I searched his face one last time. I looked for the boy who used to sit on the floor of the janitor's closet with me while I ate my lunch. The boy who told me he wanted to be just like me when he grew up. He wasn't there. In his place was a stranger who was willing to let his father be humiliated for the sake of a lakeside view. I'm sure, I told Carla. I'll be in the parking lot. Give me 30 minutes. I ended the call. The quartet started playing again, a jaunty tune that felt like an insult. I walked past the tables, past the relatives who suddenly found their centerpieces fascinating, past the waiters who stood frozen with trays of champagne. No one stopped me. No one said my name. The ballroom doors closed behind me with a soft, heavy thud. The cool night air hit my face, chilling the skin where Brianna's hand had left its mark. I walked to my old Ford, its faded blue paint looking gray under the flickering parking lot lights. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the cracked steering wheel. 30 minutes. 30 minutes for my son and his bride to enjoy the last moments of the life they thought they'd secured. 30 minutes before the man they tried to erase from his own story stops pretending to be a victim and shows everyone in that ballroom exactly who he really is. I checked the rearview mirror. My reflection was distorted by the cracked lens of my glasses, making me look like a jigsaw puzzle that hadn't been put back together quite right. I reached up and took them off, tossing them onto the dashboard. I didn't need them to see what was coming next. What happened next wouldn't just change my life. It would dismantle theirs, brick by greedy brick. I didn't know it yet, but as I sat there in the silence of my truck, a car was already turning into the club's long driveway. And the person inside wasn't just bringing a folder. They were bringing the end of everything Logan and Brianna thought they knew about the world. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, a low electric hum that filled the silence inside my truck. I leaned my head back against the frayed headrest and closed my eyes. The sting on my cheek was fading into a dull throb, but the memory of the look in Logan's eyes, that blank, distant apathy, was fresh. I needed these 30 minutes. I needed to let the cold air settle the rage before Carla arrived, because once the wheels started turning, there would be no stopping them. I found myself thinking about Ellen. If she were here, she wouldn't have been surprised. She always had an instinct for people that I lacked. I was the builder. She was the architect of our lives. We'd met in the 70s, back when the town was just a handful of diners and a hardware store. We didn't have much, but we had a plan. While I was working double shifts at the school, she was working as a bookkeeper, and every extra cent we made didn't go toward new cars or fancy vacations. It went into the dirt. "Land doesn't lie to you, Martin," she used to say, her fingers stained with ink from the ledger she kept under our mattress. "People will tell you whatever you want to hear to get what's in your pocket, but the earth stays put." We bought our first duplex when Logan was 3. I remember painting the walls while he napped in a cardboard box in the corner. We told him I was just helping out, a friend. We told the neighbors I was the handyman. It was a game at first, the invisible coals, but as the years went by and the portfolio grew, the game became a way of life. We wanted Logan to grow up with grit, We wanted him to understand that a man's worth was measured by the calluses on his hands, not the balance in his bank account. I thought I'd succeeded. I really did. Logan was a good kid. He was the kind of boy who'd help a turtle across the road or spend his Saturday helping me clear brush at the lake house without complaining. But then came the scholarship to that big city university, and the internships at the high-rise firms. He started coming home for Christmas with thinner ties and thicker walls around his heart. He started looking at my work boots like they were something he needed to apologize for. Then, 2 years ago, he brought Brianna home. I remember the day vividly. I'd spent the morning on the back deck of the lake house, grilling burgers. The sun was painting the water a deep, liquid gold, and the air smelled like pine and charcoal. Logan pulled up in a leased BMW that cost more than my first 3 houses combined, and outstepped Brianna. She was wearing a sundress that probably cost $500 and shoes that were never meant to touch grass. She looked at my house, the house Ellen and I had built with our own 4 hands, and her nose crinkled just a fraction of an inch. "It's so rustic," she had said. Her voice was like honey poured over broken glass. "It has such potential, doesn't it, Logan?" Logan had laughed nervously, glancing at me. "Dad likes it the way it is, Bree." "Of course he does," she'd replied, her eyes already scanning the roofline, calculating the cost of a remodel or a teardown. "But imagine this place with floor-to-ceiling glass. A wraparound infinity deck. We could really turn this into something respectable." That was the first red flag. I should have seen the bull charging then, but I was so happy to see my son smiling that I let it slide. I thought she was just young and ambitious. I didn't realize she was a surveyor, marking out the territory she intended to seize. Over the next year, the suggestions turned into a slow, methodical campaign of psychological warfare. It started with the small stuff. Brianna would visit and helpfully reorganize my kitchen, moving things to high shelves I could barely reach. When I'd ask where the salt was, she'd sigh a long, performative sound and look at Logan. "Oh, Martin, we talked about this. It's right where it's always been. Are you sure you're feeling okay today? You seem a little foggy." I wasn't foggy. I was being gaslit. She started losing my mail. Important things: property tax assessments, utility bills, notices from the county. When I'd get a late notice, she'd be right there, clutching her heart. "Logan, your father forgot the electric bill again. This is getting dangerous. What if the heat goes out in the middle of January? He could freeze." Logan, who used to trust me with his life, started to look at me with a terrifying kind of pity. He stopped asking for my advice and started talking to me like I was a toddler. "It's okay, Dad. Brianna and I will handle the paperwork. You just relax." The tension reached a boiling point 3 months ago, during a Sunday dinner that I'd cooked. I'd made Ellen's pot roast recipe, the one Logan used to beg for. Halfway through the meal, Brianna set her fork down and pulled a glossy folder from her designer purse. "Martin, we've been doing some research," she said, her voice dropping into that fake sweet register she used when she was about to do something cruel. "We found this lovely community. The Willow Springs Manor. It's top of the line. They have high-born-hour medical staff, organized social hours, and they have a vacancy in the East Wing." I stared at the brochure. It featured a picture of a man who looked 10 years older than me staring blankly at a jigsaw puzzle. "I'm not moving," I said, my voice steady. "I like my house. I like my privacy." "Dad, be reasonable," Logan chimed in, not even looking up from his plate. "The lake house is too much for you. The stairs are a hazard, and honestly, it's selfish to keep that much square footage to yourself when Brianna and I are trying to save for a down payment on a place of our own. If we sold your place, we could get a huge house for all of us. You'd have a mother-in-law suite in the basement. It's the perfect solution." "A basement?" I'd whispered. "You want me to move from the lakefront into your basement?" "It's for your safety, Martin," Brianna snapped, the honey finally disappearing from her voice. "You're 69. You're one trip away from a broken hip and a slow death on the kitchen floor. Don't be a burden on your son. Do the right thing." That was the night I called Carla. But the real betrayal, the one that made tonight's events inevitable, happened just 2 weeks ago. I'd gone out to the hardware store, and when I came back early because I'd forgotten my wallet, I saw a strange car in my driveway. It was a sleek, silver sedan with a local real estate agency's logo on the door. I walked quietly through the backwoods, approaching the house from the lakeside. There, on my deck, stood Brianna. She wasn't alone. Beside her was a man with a clipboard and a measuring wheel. "We can probably list it as a teardown," the man was saying. "The lot alone is worth $1.5 million. If we clear the trees toward the north, we can double the water view." "Excellent," Brianna said. and I'll never forget the coldness in her tone. We just need to finalize the legal guardianship. My lawyer says once we have the medical evaluation showing his cognitive decline, the signature on the deed becomes a formality. Logan is already on board. He just doesn't know the specifics yet. He thinks we're helping his dad. My blood had turned to ice. She wasn't just waiting for me to get old. She was actively engineering my demise. She was stealing my mail to prove I was incompetent. She was moving my belongings to make me feel crazy. She was planning to bulldoze the house Ellen and I had built before I was even cold in the ground. And Logan was on board. I didn't confront them. I turned around, walked back to my truck, and drove to Carla's office. We spent 6 hours going through the final contingency file. It was a plan I'd built years ago as a what-if scenario, a way to protect my legacy if Logan ever turned out to be the kind of man who valued gold over blood. I never thought I'd actually have to use it. Back in the present, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness of the parking lot. A silver sedan pulled into the space next to mine. Carla Munro stepped out, her expression as unreadable as a stone wall. She was carrying a leather briefcase, the kind that held enough legal firepower to level a city block. She walked over to my window and tapped on the glass. I rolled it down. "You look like hell, Martin," she said, her eyes landing on my red cheek. "I've been better," I replied. "Did you bring it?" She held up the briefcase. Everything. The property transfers, the debt disclosures, the trust revocations. And the thing you asked for at the last minute, the forensic audit of Brianna's personal accounts. She paused, looking at the ballroom where the music was still thumping, unaware of the storm about to break. "You realize that once I walk in there, your relationship with your son will never be the same," Carla warned. "You're not just taking away their future, Martin. You're showing them that you've been holding the leash the entire time." I looked at the ballroom. I thought about the slap. I thought about the basement suite. I thought about the man with the measuring wheel on my deck. "He's not my son right now, Carla," I said, opening the truck door. "He's a stranger who let a wolf into the house. It's time to show the wolf who actually owns the woods." I stepped out of the truck, straightening my cheap blazer. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of peace. For years, I had been the invisible man, the janitor, the confused old father. But tonight, the invisible man was going to become very, very loud. "Wait," I said, stopping Carla as she headed toward the entrance. "One more thing. Did you find out who authorized the wellness check with that doctor last week?" Carla looked down at her notes, then back at me. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It wasn't Brianna, Martin. The signature on the request form. It was Logan's." The peace I felt shattered. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. I thought Brianna was the architect, but if Logan had signed that paper, if he had been the one to initiate the process to have me declared incompetent. "Let's go," I said, my voice thick with a new kind of resolve. I don't want to keep the happy couple waiting. We began the walk toward the ballroom. I didn't know it yet, but the secret Carla was holding in the back of that folder, the one she hadn't mentioned yet, was going to be the final blow that no one, not even me, was prepared for. The heavy brass-handled doors of the Harborview Country Club swung open, and for the second time that night, the world inside the ballroom came to a screeching halt. The DJ had just transitioned into a upbeat pop song, something loud and synth-heavy that felt like a neon sign flashing in a graveyard. Guests were mid-dance, drinks were mid-sip, and laughter was cut short like a wire had been snipped. Walking back into that room felt like stepping onto a battlefield where the other side didn't even know the war had started. I didn't have my glasses on, so the faces of the socialites and Brianna's high society friends were just a blurred gallery of judgment. But I didn't need to see their eyes to feel the weight of their disdain. I was the crazy old man who had caused a scene. I was the janitor who didn't know his place. Beside me, Carla was a sharp, silver contrast to my worn-out appearance. She walked with the kind of calculated rhythm that only comes from decades of winning in courtrooms. She didn't look like a friend of a janitor. She looked like the person who decides who gets to keep their house and who ends up on the street. "Look who's back for more," a voice rang out. It was Brianna. She was standing near the cake table, a glass of dark red wine in her hand that looked dangerously close to staining her white lace. She didn't look shaken by what had happened in the parking lot. If anything, she looked emboldened. She'd spent the last 30 minutes spinning the narrative to the guests, playing the part of the long-suffering daughter-in-law dealing with a senile relative. "Martin, I thought we made it clear," she said, her voice dripping with a fake, honeyed pity that made my skin crawl. "This is a private event. If you can't keep your emotions under control, You aren't welcome. Logan, honey, do something. Your father is embarrassing himself. Logan was standing by the bar, a scotch in his hand that he was gripping so hard his knuckles were white. He looked at me, then at Carla, then back at me. I waited for him to say something, anything that would prove Carla's information about the wellness check was wrong. I waited for him to tell Brianna to stop. He didn't. Dad, Logan said, his voice sounding hollow and exhausted. Just go home. We'll talk in the morning. Please. Don't make this worse than it already is. Worse for who, Logan? I asked. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of that room, it carried like a bell. Worse for me? Or worse for the story you've been telling yourselves? I looked around the room. I saw the faces of men I had quietly surpassed in wealth a decade ago. I saw the local councilman, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and the real estate developers who thought they were the kings of this county. For years I had watched them from the hallways of the high school, pushing a bucket of gray water while they debated the future of the town. They never looked at me. To them, I was just part of the architecture, a piece of the furniture that occasionally emptied the trash. They had no idea that I owned the mortgage on the building where the councilman held his private dinners. They didn't know that the 40 acres of forest the developers were eyeing for a new shopping mall belonged to a silent holding company that was, in reality, just me and a ledger in a shoebox. Who is this, Martin? Brianna asked, waving a hand toward Carla. Another friend from the senior center. Did you bring a witness for your tantrum? Carla stepped forward before I could answer. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. My name is Carla Munro, of Munro and Associates. I am the lead counsel and trustee for Cole Holdings, and I am here to serve notice. A few people in the front of the crowd shifted. The name Cole Holdings was well known in this town, though no one ever saw a face attached to it. It was the name on the checks that kept the local library open. It was the name on the deeds of 3 major storefronts on Main Street. It was the ghost that owned half the county. Notice for what? Brianna scoffed, though I saw her grip on the wineglass tighten. My father-in-law is a retired janitor. He doesn't have holdings. He has a dusty lake house and a truck that's older than I am. That dusty lake house is currently held in a revocable living trust, Carla said, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. A trust that was designed to pass to Logan Cole upon his father's death, provided certain conditions of care and conduct were met. However, as of 20 minutes ago, those conditions have been breached. The room went cold. Logan set his drink down on the bar with a muffled clack. Breached? What are you talking about? It's a family home. It's my inheritance. It was your inheritance, Logan, I said. I thought back to a rainy Tuesday 14 years ago. Ellen was already sick, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. We were sitting at the small kitchen table in the lake house, the one with the chipped formica top. We had just finished the paperwork for the trust. Martin, she had whispered, her hand trembling as she touched mine. Money is a mirror. It shows you who a person really is when they think no one is looking. If Logan ever looks into that mirror and sees a stranger, you have to promise me you won't let the money feed the monster. I had promised her. And for 14 years, I had kept that promise by staying invisible. I wanted to see if Logan would love me when I had nothing. I wanted to see if he would respect the man who mopped floors as much as he would respect the man who owned the building. Tonight, I had my answer. As the primary trustee, Carla continued, pulling a document from her briefcase, Mr. Cole has authorized me to freeze all secondary accounts associated with the Cole estate. That includes the educational stipend that has been quietly paying off your law school loans, Brianna. Brianna's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. My, what? And, Carla added, turning to Logan, the anonymous venture capital injection that saved your firm from bankruptcy last July? That didn't come from an angel investor, Logan. It came from your father's private pension fund. A fund that has now been fully liquidated and moved into a protected charitable trust. Logan stumbled back a step, hitting the edge of a table. A centerpiece of white roses wobbled and fell, spilling water across the tablecloth. Dad, you were the investor? I thought I'd finally made it on my own. You never made it on your own, son, I said, and the words felt like they were being carved out of my chest. I was the floor beneath your feet every time you tripped. I was the hand in your pocket every time you ran out of cash. And I did it because I loved you, because I thought that by taking away the stress of money, I was giving you the room to be a good man. I took a step toward him, ignoring Brianna as she began to hyperventilate. But then you signed that paper, Logan, I whispered. The wellness check. You tried to have your own father declared incompetent so your wife could get her hands on a piece of dirt. Dad, Brianna said it was just a precaution. Logan shouted, his voice cracking. She said you were forgetting things. She said you were a danger to yourself. I was trying to protect you. No, I said. You were trying to protect your comfort. You were trying to fast forward to the part where I'm gone and the house is yours. Brianna suddenly lunged forward, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. You old liar, she screamed, the wine in her glass splashing onto the floor. You sat there and watched us struggle. You watched me stress over every bill, every payment, while you were sitting on millions. You're the monster. You let us beg. I never heard you beg, Brianna, I said. I only heard you demand. I only heard you insult the woman who built that house. I only heard you plan to bulldoze my life before I was even out of the way. Carla stepped between us as Brianna took another step, her hands curled into claws. There's one more thing, Carla said, her voice dropping into a register that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. In the process of auditing the accounts for the trust revocation, we discovered a series of unauthorized transfers. Significant ones, totaling nearly $200,000 over the last 18 months. Logan looked at Brianna. What transfers? Brianna didn't answer. She was staring at the folder in Carla's hand, as if it contained a venomous snake. It seems, Carla said, looking directly at Brianna, that someone has been skimming from the wedding escrow account, which, ironically, was also funded by Mr. Cole and diverting it to a private offshore account under a maiden name. A name that, according to our records, belongs to a woman who was already married once before. A marriage that was never legally annulled. The silence that followed wasn't just heavy, it was absolute. It was the sound of a 1,000-piece puzzle being tossed into a furnace. Logan turned to his bride, his face a mask of pure horror. Brianna? What is she talking about? Already married? Whose money were you taking? Brianna opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, but every person who had been laughing with her moments ago was now backing away. The high society friends were suddenly very interested in the exits. I didn't know it yet, I said, echoing the thought that had been haunting me in the truck. But the wolf wasn't just in the house. The wolf had been leading the pack the whole time. But the biggest shock wasn't Brianna's secret marriage. It wasn't the stolen money. It was the person who stepped through the ballroom doors at that exact moment. A person whose presence turned the entire night from a family feud into a nightmare that none of us would ever wake up from. Martin? A voice called out from the back of the room. I turned. My heart stopped. Standing there, clutching a worn leather handbag, and looking exactly like she had the day she disappeared, was a woman who was supposed to have been buried 3 years ago. Ellen? I whispered. The woman stood in the doorway, the light from the hallway silhouetting her in a way that made my heart lurch into my throat. For 3 seconds, 3 long, agonizing seconds, I was a younger man again, and the world was right. The way she tilted her head, the specific curve of her shoulders, the way she clutched her handbag against her stomach, it was Ellen. It had to be. But as she stepped further into the ballroom, the harsh, unforgiving glow of the chandeliers stripped away the illusion. This woman's hair was a shade too brittle. Her eyes lacked the quiet warmth that had been my compass for 40 years, and the lines around her mouth were etched with a bitterness Ellen never possessed. This wasn't my wife. It was Sarah, Ellen's younger sister. A woman I hadn't seen since the day we lowered Ellen into the ground, mostly because I had been the one paying for her stay in a high-end rehabilitation center 3 states away, a secret I'd kept even from Logan. Sarah? I croaked, my voice sounding like it was being dragged over gravel. Logan stared at her, his mouth hanging open. Aunt Sarah? What are you doing here? Dad said he said you were too ill to travel. Sarah didn't look at me. She looked at Brianna, and in that look, I saw a bridge of fire being built. I was, Sarah said, her voice thin and reedy. But then this lovely girl called me. She told me what was happening. She told me that while I was tucked away in that facility, my sister's husband was sitting on a mountain of gold, letting his own family rot. She told me you were keeping me there to keep me quiet, Martin. The room erupted. It was a feeding frenzy now. The janitor wasn't just a liar, he was a captor, a manipulator who hid his own sister-in-law to protect his hoard. Brianna stepped toward Sarah, her face shifting instantly from a mask of rage to one of saintly compassion. She put an arm around Sarah's shoulders, looking out at the crowd like a general who had just received reinforcements. It's okay, Sarah, Brianna cooed, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom. You're safe now. I told you I'd bring the truth to light. I told you we wouldn't let him hide what he's done to this family anymore." She turned her gaze to me, and for the first time, I saw the true depth of her brilliance. She hadn't just been planning to take the house. She had been building a case of elder abuse and financial coercion. She had been scouting my weaknesses, and she had found the one person whose testimony could actually damage me. "Martin," Brianna said, her voice loud enough for the guests in the back to hear every syllable. "Everyone here can see the pattern now. You hide money. You hide family members. You manipulate Logan into thinking he's failing so you can swoop in and play the hero with anonymous investments. You've been gaslighting this entire town for decades." She looked at Logan, who was swaying on his feet. "Logan, look at your aunt. She's been living on a stipend while your father owns downtown. He didn't keep the money secret to teach you grit. He kept it to keep you under his thumb. He's a hoarder of power, Logan, and he's losing his grip." I looked at Sarah, my wife's sister. "Sarah, I put you in that facility because you asked me to, because you said you couldn't stay clean without help. I've paid for every doctor, every meal, every therapy session for 3 years. I didn't hide you. I protected you." "Protected me?" Sarah spat, a flicker of that old family fire in her eyes. "Or buried me? You never told Logan I was still in the state. You told him I moved to the coast. You lied, Martin. Just like you lied about being a poor janitor. I didn't know it yet. I whispered to the empty space where Ellen should have been, but the betrayal wasn't a single strike. It was a web, and I was the fly." Logan stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and mounting anger. "Dad, is it true? Is Aunt Sarah here because of Brianna? Did you lie to me about where she was?" "I didn't want you to see her like that, Logan," I said, reaching out a hand. "She was struggling. I wanted to give her a chance to get well before." "Before what?" Brianna interrupted, her voice a sharp, clinical blade. "Before you could find a way to take her inheritance too? Because Sarah told me about the property in South Carolina. The one your wife, Ellen, left to both of them in a private will. The one you never mentioned." I froze. My heart felt like it had been plunged into a bucket of ice. The South Carolina property wasn't an inheritance. It was a toxic waste site, a former dry cleaning facility that Ellen had bought as a favor to a friend, only to realize the soil was contaminated. It was $1 million liability, not an asset. Ellen had left it to Sarah in the will as a placeholder, with a side agreement that I would manage the cleanup and sell it for Sarah's benefit once it was cleared. But Brianna didn't know that. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. "You see?" Brianna said to the crowd, gesturing at my frozen expression. "He didn't even tell his own son about the out-of-state assets. He's been funneling money out of the trust for years. And that's why, Logan, that's why I did what I had to do." She reached into her bridal clutch, the same one she'd used to hold her vows, and pulled out a legal document with a red seal. "I didn't just ask for a wellness check, Logan," she said softly, her eyes welling with fake tears. "Based on Sarah's testimony and the evidence of the hidden offshore accounts, I filed for an emergency temporary guardianship this morning. The judge signed it 4 hours ago. As of right now, Martin Cole is legally a ward of the state under my supervision." The ballroom went so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Carla stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "That's impossible." "I would have been notified. I am the attorney of record." "Not for the private estate," Brianna countered, her smile widening just a fraction. "I used a different firm, one that specializes in protecting seniors from themselves. Since Martin forgot to disclose his full assets to the court during his last tax filing, he's been flagged for suspicious financial activity. The guardianship is in effect until a full hearing can be held." She looked at me, and the triumph in her eyes was so bright it was blinding. "So, Martin," she whispered, leaning in so only I could hear, "you can keep your files and your secret folders. But as your legal guardian, I'm the one who decides where you sleep tonight. And I think the west wing of that senior center we talked about has a very lovely bed waiting for you." I looked at Logan. "My son, my only child." "Logan," I said, my voice trembling, "you can't let her do this." Logan looked at Brianna, then at Sarah, then at the document in Brianna's hand. He looked like a man who had been given a map of a world he didn't recognize. "She's trying to help, Dad," Logan whispered, his voice breaking. "If you're hiding Aunt Sarah, if you're hiding property, maybe you are confused. Maybe you aren't the man I thought you were." He turned away from me. He actually turned his back on me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible, "but I can't fight for you if you won't tell me the truth." Brianna stepped toward me, 2 large men in security uniforms appearing at her side. I realized then that they weren't club security. They were from the facility. "Come on, Martin," she said, her voice now loud and performatively gentle. "Let's get you somewhere quiet. You've had a very long night." I felt the heavy hands of the guards on my arms. I looked at Carla, but she was already on her phone, her face pale. I looked at Sarah, who was staring at the floor, clutching her purse. But what happened next was the one thing Brianna hadn't accounted for. As they started to lead me toward the door, a man I hadn't seen in years, a man who had been sitting in the very back of the room, nursing a soda, stood up. He was wearing a weathered military jacket and had a face that looked like it had been carved out of a mountainside. "Hold on a minute," the man said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a freight train. The guard stopped. Brianna frowned, her eyes narrowing as she tried to place him. "And who are you?" she snapped. "This is a private legal matter. My name is Samuel Harrington," the man said, walking toward the center of the room. "I'm Ellen's brother, and I'm the one who actually owns that South Carolina property." He stopped in front of Brianna, his eyes boring into hers. "And more importantly," Samuel added, pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket, "I'm the person Sarah has been calling for the last 3 weeks, because she felt guilty about the script you wrote for her to read tonight." Brianna's face didn't just go pale. It turned a sickly, bruised shade of gray. "Sarah?" Brianna whispered, turning to my sister-in-law. Sarah finally looked up. There were no tears in her eyes now, only a cold, sharp clarity. "I told you, Brianna," Sarah said, her voice stronger than it had been all night. "I'm an addict, not a traitor. Martin didn't hide me. He saved me. And I'm not going to let you kill him just so you can live in a house that doesn't belong to you." Samuel clicked the play button on the recorder. What happened next? I realized as the sound of Brianna's own voice began to fill the ballroom, didn't just change the game, it set the entire board on fire. The sound of the recording was thin and tinny, but in the hush of the ballroom, it sounded like a thunderclap. It was Brianna's voice, but not the one she had been using all night. This wasn't the sweet, patient daughter-in-law or the terrified bride. This was a woman discussing a business transaction, and the commodity she was trading was my life. "He's a senile old fool, Sarah," the recording crackled. "The more he resists, the crazier he looks. I've already moved his medication. He'll be confused enough for the doctor to sign the evaluation by Thursday. Logan is in my pocket. He's so desperate for someone to tell him he's a big man that he won't even notice when I sell the lake house from under him. Once Martine is in the facility, we sell the South Carolina land as a liability to my brother's shell company, and we split the real development value. Logan won't even know it was worth millions." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the hum of the cooling vents. Logan didn't move. He didn't blink. He looked like a statue of a man who had just watched his entire world vanish into a sinkhole. Brianna's hand, the one still clutching the legal document, began to shake. That's a deep fake," she stammered, her voice high and desperate. "Logan, you know how easy it is to forge audio these days. Your father and your uncle, they're trying to frame me because they don't want to lose control." Samuel didn't even look at her. He just turned the recorder off and tucked it back into his jacket. "My sister, Ellen, was a lot of things, Brianna," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "But she wasn't a fool. She taught me how to spot a grifter when I was 10 years old. You're not even a good one. You're just loud." I looked at Logan. "Logan," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you hear what she said? She moved my medication. That's why I was feeling dizzy last week. That's why I couldn't find my keys. She wasn't helping me, son. She was drugging me." Logan finally turned to face Brianna. The look in his eyes wasn't anger, not yet. It was a terrifying, hollow kind of grief. "You moved his pills?" he asked. "You told me he was taking them twice because he forgot. You told me you were worried about his heart." "Logan, I did it for us," Brianna shrieked, the mask finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She stepped back, her heels catching on the train of her dress. "He's sitting on millions, Logan. Millions. And he was going to let us live in a rental while he played humble janitor in a house that could pay for our entire lives. I was just accelerating the inevitable. He's old. He doesn't need it." "He's my father," Logan said, the words falling like lead weights. "He's a hoarder," she screamed back, her face contorting into something unrecognizable. "And you're a coward. You were never going to ask him for the money. You were going to let me struggle while he mopped floors for fun. I had to take charge." She turned to the guards, her eyes wild. "What are you waiting for? I have the legal paperwork. The judge signed the order. Take him out of here. He's a danger to himself and others. Look at him, he's hysterical." The two men in the gray uniforms looked at each other. They were young, built like linebackers, and clearly uncomfortable with the drama. But the paper in Brianna's hand was real. In the state of Maryland, an emergency guardianship order is a powerful weapon, and until a judge vacates it, these men had a job to do. "Sir," one of the guards said, stepping toward me. "We have to follow the order. You need to come with us quietly." "No," Logan said, stepping in front of me. "He's staying right here." "Logan, move," Brianna hissed. "If you interfere with a court order, you'll go to jail too. Do you want to spend your wedding night in a cell?" The irony of her words wasn't lost on anyone. The room was still filled with guests, many of whom were now filming the entire meltdown on their phones. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a viral execution. Carla stepped forward, her phone still pressed to her ear. "I just spoke with Judge Holloway's clerk," she announced, her voice cutting through Brianna's hysterics. The emergency petition was filed with a forged signature from a second physician, Dr. Eris Thorne. He's currently in London on sabbatical. He couldn't have signed that evaluation this morning. Brianna's breath hitched. I have the signature right here." "You have a photocopy of a signature," Carla countered. "And the clerk is already notifying the sheriff's department. That document is not only invalid, Brianna, it's a felony." The guards immediately stepped back from me, their hands going to their belts. They weren't interested in being part of a kidnapping charge. "Wait," Brianna said, her voice suddenly small. "Wait, Logan. Let's just talk. I was doing it for our future. I was doing it so we could have a real life, a life like these people." She gestured vaguely to the room of wealthy onlookers. "Don't you want that? Don't you want to be more than just a janitor's son?" Logan looked at her, and for the first time in months, I saw my son, the real Logan, looking back. "I was proud to be a janitor's son," he said quietly. "Until I met you. You made me feel like my father's life was something I had to apologize for. You made me feel like the man who worked 2 jobs to put me through college was a burden." He reached up and slowly, deliberately, pulled the boutonniere from his lapel, dropping the white flower onto the floor. "The only burden in this room, Brianna, is you." Brianna looked around the room. Her allies were gone. Sarah was standing with Samuel, her face set in a grim line of regret. The high society friends were already sneaking out the back doors, terrified of being subpoenaed. She was alone in her lace and crystals, standing in the middle of a wreckage she had built with her own hands. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register. "I'm your wife, Logan. We signed the license before the ceremony. Half of everything you inherit is mine now. You want to walk away? Fine. But you'll be walking away with nothing. I'll tie you up in divorce court for 10 years. I'll take the lake house. I'll take the downtown properties. I'll take every cent your father ever hid." She looked at me, a cruel, triumphant smile touching her lips. "You forgot one thing, Martin. In this state, a marriage is a contract, and I'm very good at contracts." I felt the old familiar weight in my chest. She was right. The marriage license had been signed an hour before the slap. Even if the trust was revoked, Logan's future assets could be contested. She could bleed us dry in legal fees, dragging my name through the mud until there was nothing left but dust. "You're right, Brianna," I said, stepping around Logan. "Marriage is a contract. And like any contract, it requires all parties to be who they say they are." I looked at Carla, who nodded once. "Logan," I said, "do you remember when I told you your mother and I had a secret way of protecting the business? Something we did just in case the invisible life ever became too visible?" Logan shook his head. "No? What are you talking about?" "We didn't just buy land, Logan," I said. "We bought the bank." I turned back to Brianna. "The mortgage on your leased BMW? The personal line of credit you opened last month to pay for this wedding? The private offshore account you thought was so secure? They're all handled by a subsidiary of Cole Finance. Which means, as of 5 minutes ago, I didn't just freeze your accounts. I called the notes." Brianna's smile vanished. You can't do that. There are grace periods. There are clauses for moral turpitude and fraudulent representation in every commercial contract you signed," Carla interjected. "And since you lied about your previous marriage on your credit applications, which is bank fraud, by the way, the bank has the right to seize all collateral immediately." Outside, the unmistakable sound of a heavy truck echoed in the parking lot. A set of amber strobe lights flashed against the ballroom windows. "That would be the repo man," I said. "He's starting with the BMW. And by tomorrow morning, he'll be moving on to the designer furniture in your apartment. The apartment that, coincidentally, is owned by my holding company." Brianna let out a sound that wasn't a scream, it was a howl of pure, unadulterated frustration. She lunged at me again, her fingers aimed for my eyes, but Samuel was there in an instant, catching her wrists and holding her firm. "That's enough," Samuel said. "The police are in the driveway, Brianna. You can leave in the back of a squad car, or you can walk out of here right now and never look back. But if I see your face within 100 miles of my brother-in-law again, I won't need a court order to handle you." Samuel let go of her. Brianna stood there, panting, her hair coming loose from its intricate pins. She looked at Logan one last time, hoping for a shred of the weakness she'd exploited for years. But Logan just looked away, his hand resting on my shoulder. She turned and ran. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She just gathered up her heavy skirts and fled through the service entrance, disappearing into the dark. The ballroom was silent again. The remaining guests looked at us, waiting for a speech, for a resolution, for the happy ending. But there was no happiness here, only the exhaustion of a man who had finally stopped hiding, and the heartbreak of a son who had finally started seeing. "Dad," Logan whispered, his hand tightening on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I don't know if I can ever make this up to you." "We have time, Logan," I said. "That's the one thing the money couldn't buy us. Time." But as the police arrived and the ballroom began to clear, I saw Carla standing near the bar, staring at a new notification on her tablet. Her face was pale whiter than it had been all night. "Martin," she said, her voice shaking. "We have a problem. A big one." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "What is it? Did Brianna get away?" "No," Carla said, turning the tablet toward me. "It's not about Brianna. It's about the trust. Someone else just filed a claim against the estate. Someone who says they have a superior right to the lake house." I looked at the screen. The name on the filing wasn't Brianna's. It wasn't Sarah's. It was a name I hadn't seen in 30 years. A name that proved the betrayal tonight wasn't just about money. It was about a secret I had buried so deep, I thought it had turned to stone. "Who is it, Dad?" Logan asked, leaning in. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the name. Because if this person was back, it meant that everything I had told Logan about his mother, everything I had built my life on, was a lie. The name on the screen didn't just hurt. It felt like a ghost had reached out from the grave and wrapped its cold, dead fingers around my throat. Arthur Vance. I stared at the black letters on Carla's tablet until they began to swim. 30 years. For 30 years, I had lived with the weight of that name buried in the deepest, darkest corner of my conscience. I had built a fortress of brick and mortar, a life of quiet humility, all to keep the shadow of Arthur Vance from falling over my family. "Dad." Logan's voice was a jagged edge, cutting through my shock. He was leaning over my shoulder, his eyes darting across the legal filing. "Who is Arthur Vance?" "The document says he's the rightful heir to the Cole Lake House. It says your purchase of the property in Mutngin Chintrum Chinmoy born was fraudulent." I couldn't answer him. My mouth felt like it was full of dry ash. Carla pulled the tablet back, her fingers flying across the screen as she pulled up the supporting documents. "Martin, this isn't just a claim," she whispered, her voice tight with professional panic. "They've filed a lis pendens against every single one of your major holdings. They aren't just going for the house. They're claiming that the seed money for Cole Holdings was embezzled from the Vance estate 3 decades ago." The ballroom was nearly empty now. The police had taken a statement from Samuel and were waiting near the exit, their presence a silent, looming threat. The high society guests had vanished, leaving behind only the wreckage of a wedding, half-empty glasses, overturned chairs, and the lingering scent of lilies and betrayal. I didn't know it yet. I thought, the internal narration of my life turning cold and analytical, but the slap in the ballroom was just the opening bell. The real fight hadn't even begun. I walked over to a nearby table and slumped into a chair. The rounded shoulders I'd practiced for years, the janitor's slump, finally felt real. I felt every one of my 69 years. "Arthur Vance wasn't just a man I knew, Logan," I said, staring at the white tablecloth. "He was the man I replaced." Logan pulled up a chair across from me, his face a mask of disbelief. "What does that mean, Dad? You told me you bought the lake house with the money you saved from your first construction job. You told me it was a fixer-upper." "It was," I said, "but the money didn't come from construction. Not all of it." I looked at Samuel, who was standing by the door, his eyes narrowed. He knew. He'd always known part of the truth, though we'd never spoken of it. "In Mutngin Chintrum Tarmui Tarm, I was 30 years old and desperate," I began. "I was working as a groundskeeper for Arthur Vance. He was a wealthy recluse, a man who had made millions in the shipping industry and then crawled into a bottle of scotch and stayed there. He had no family, no friends, just me and a sprawling estate that was rotting from the inside out. I closed my eyes, seeing Arthur's face a map of broken veins and bitterness. He died in my arms one Tuesday afternoon. I continued. He'd had a massive stroke. But before he went, he did something I never expected. He gave me the key to a floor safe in his study. He told me the government was coming for his taxes, and his vulture relatives were coming for the rest. He told me to take the cash and the bearer bonds, burn the records of his offshore accounts, and build something worth a damn. "So you stole it?" Logan whispered. "I took it," I corrected. "I took it because he asked me to. I spent the next 5 years washing that money through small, legitimate businesses. I became the janitor because it was the perfect cover. No one looks twice at the man with the mop. I built Cole Holdings on the bones of Arthur Vance's secrets, thinking he was the last of his line." Carla interrupted, her voice sharp. "The filing isn't from Arthur, Martin. He's dead. It's from his sole, surviving grandchild. A woman named Meredith Vance." I felt the blood drain from my face. Arthur didn't have a grandchild. His only daughter died in a car accident in the 70s. "That's what he believed," Carla said, sliding the tablet back to me. "But according to the birth certificate attached to this claim, the daughter had a child in secret. A daughter she gave up for adoption." I looked at the photograph attached to the claim. It was a grainy, black and white photo of a young woman. She had the same sharp jawline, the same cold, calculating eyes. "Oh, God," I whispered. "What?" Logan asked. "It's Brianna's mother," I said. The silence that followed was deafening. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just fit. They locked together with the force of a trap snapping shut. Brianna hadn't just met Logan by chance. She hadn't just discovered my wealth. She had been hunting us. She knew about Arthur Vance. She knew about the money. She'd spent her entire life grooming herself to take back what she believed was her birthright. The slap, the manipulation, the wellness check, they weren't just about a house. They were about revenge for a grandfather she'd never met, and a fortune she believed I'd stolen. "She's not just a gold digger, Logan," I said, looking at my son's devastated face. "She's a scalp hunter." "And she just took mine." Logan put his head in his hands. "She used me. Every kiss, every I love you. It was all just to get closer to the safe." "She doesn't just want the money, Logan," Carla warned. "She wants a total wipeout. She's claiming that since the original funds were stolen, every property you've ever bought, every cent in the trust, is legally hers. She's filed for an immediate seizure of all Cole assets pending the outcome of the fraud trial." I stood up, my knees popping. The harmless old man was gone. In his place was the man who had outmaneuvered the taxman and the developers for 30 years. I had hit rock bottom, yes. I was facing the loss of everything I'd built. But there's one thing about being a janitor for 30 years, you learn how to clean up a mess. "Samuel," I called out. Ellen's brother walked over, his face grim. "Yeah, Cliff? You still have those contacts in the federal marshal's office? The ones who specialize in asset recovery?" Samuel nodded. "I can make a call." "Good," I said. "And Carla, I need you to find the Vance files. Not the ones in the safe, the ones I kept in the crawl space behind the furnace at the lake house." Carla frowned. "I didn't know there were other files." "There are," I said. Arthur Vance wasn't just a recluse. He was a whistleblower. He'd kept records of every crooked politician and shipping executive he'd ever worked with. He told me to burn them. I didn't. I kept them as insurance. I looked at Logan. "Son, I know you're hurting. I know you feel like your life is a lie. But right now, we need to move. Brianna isn't gone. She's just gone to her next position. She's going to try to freeze our personal accounts by morning." "What are we going to do?" Logan asked. "We're going to use the one thing she doesn't think I have," I said. "Her own history." We left the ballroom through the back exit, avoiding the few remaining paparazzi who had gathered at the front. We piled into Samuel's SUV, leaving my old Ford in the lot. It was a decoy now. As we drove toward the safe house, a small, nondescript cabin, on the other side of the county that even Logan didn't know about, I checked my phone. A text message appeared from an unknown number. "I told you, Martin. Invisible money just brings the wolves. I'm not the only one who knows who you really are. See you in court. B." I didn't know it yet. I thought as we pulled into the gravel driveway of the cabin. But Brianna's biggest mistake wasn't the slap or the fraud. It was thinking that she was the only one who had been keeping secrets. We stepped into the cabin, the air smelling of cedar and old paper. Samuel stayed by the window, his hand near his holster. Carla opened her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her tired face. But as I reached for the light switch, a voice spoke from the shadows of the small kitchen. "It took you long enough, Martin." I froze. I knew that voice. It was a voice that belonged to the woman Brianna claimed was her mother, the woman who was supposed to be leading the charge against me. Meredith Vance stepped into the light. She wasn't wearing a designer suit. She was wearing a waitress's uniform, her face tired and etched with a weary kind of honesty. "Meredith?" I whispered. "I'm not the one suing you, Martin," she said, her voice trembling. "Brianna, she's not my daughter. She's my niece. And she's been holding me captive in a motel for 3 weeks so she could use my name on the filings." The reversal hit me like a physical blow. Brianna wasn't just a hunter, she was a ghost maker. "Where is she, Meredith?" I asked. "She's at the lake house," Meredith said, tears welling in her eyes. "She has a locksmith there right now. She's looking for the floor safe." I looked at Logan. I looked at Samuel. "The safe is empty," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "But the floorboards are rigged. If she tries to force it, she's not going to find money. She's going to find the one thing that will put her away for life." "What's in there, Dad?" Logan asked. "The real birth certificate," I said. "The one that proves Brianna isn't a Vance at all. She's the daughter of the man who killed Arthur's daughter." The silence in the cabin was broken only by the sound of a distant siren. The janitor was about to finish his final shift. The cabin was silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of Carla's laptop and the heavy, ragged breathing of Meredith Vance. I looked at this woman, the real Meredith, and saw the hollowed-out eyes of someone who had been used as a pawn in a game she never asked to play. She looked nothing like the Meredith Vance on the legal filings. Brianna had taken her aunt's identity, polished it, and weaponized it against the only man who had ever shown the Vance family a shred of mercy. "Brianna's father was my brother, Thomas," Meredith whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind whistling through the cedar planks. "He was a bitter, violent man, Martin. He spent his whole life blaming Arthur for his own failures. He's the one who told Brianna that you were a thief. He told her that you stood over Arthur's body and looted the safe while he was still warm. He died in a prison cell 3 years ago, but he left his poison in her." Logan sat across from her, his face ashen. "So she didn't just want the house. She wanted to reclaim a legacy she thought you stole from her father." "She doesn't want a legacy, Logan," I said, leaning forward. "She wants a trophy. She wants to stand on the ruins of everything your mother and I built and feel like she's finally better than the janitor's family. But she's forgotten the most important lesson Arthur ever taught. Me." "What's that?" Samuel asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his service weapon. "That the most dangerous traps are the ones you walk into willingly because you're too busy looking at the bait," I replied. I didn't know it yet, but the lake house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a pressure cooker, and Brianna was about to turn the dial to maximum. "Carla, how much time do we have before her emergency seizure hits the local banks?" I asked. "Technically, until Chin. Hong Am tomorrow when the branches open," Carla said, not looking up from her screen. "But she's already used the court order to change the security codes on your digital accounts. You're locked out, Martin. On paper, you're a man with no resources." "Good," I said, a cold, hard knot of resolve tightening in my gut. "Let her think I'm toothless. Samuel, we're going to the lake house. Meredith, you're coming with us. It's time you met your niece face to face." The drive to the lake was a blur of dark pines and moonlight. No one spoke. Logan stared out the window, his reflection in the glass looking like a ghost. I knew what he was thinking. He was wondering if any part of the last 2 years had been real. He was mourning a woman who never existed, a bride who was nothing more than a hollowed-out vessel for her father's hate. When we pulled into the long, gravel driveway of the lake house, I saw the lights blaring from every window. A white locksmith's van was parked crookedly on the lawn, its back doors open. Tools were scattered across the porch. Brianna wasn't hiding. She was colonizing. "Wait here," I told the others as I stepped out of the SUV. I walked toward my front door, the same door I'd carried Ellen through 40 years ago. The lock had been drilled out, replaced with a shiny new deadbolt. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. The house was a disaster. The framed photos of Ellen had been swept off the hallway table, the glass shattered across the hardwood. My books had been tossed from the shelves. In the living room, a section of the floorboards near the fireplace had been pried up with a crowbar. Brianna was standing over the hole, her wedding dress now stained with dust and grease. She was holding a heavy power drill, her hair matted to her forehead with sweat. She looked like a woman possessed, a scavenger picking through a carcass. "It's not here, Martin," she hissed, sensing me before she saw me. She didn't even look up. "The floor safe. I know it's in this room. I saw the blueprints Thomas drew from memory. Where is it?" "Blueprints from a man who hadn't stepped foot in this county in 30 years. I asked, my voice echoing in the hollowed-out room. "Your father was a drunk and a liar, Brianna. He didn't know where the safe was because Arthur never trusted him enough to show him." Brianna spun around, the drill still whirring in her hand. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face a mask of primal greed. "You shut up. You're a thief. You're a nothing. You mopped floors while my family starved. That money belongs to the Vances." "The money is gone, Brianna," I said, taking a slow step toward her. "I spent it. I spent it on the library. I spent it on the park. I spent it on making sure your Aunt Meredith had a roof over her head and a chance to get clean things your father never would have done." "Liar!" she screamed. She lunged toward the fireplace, kicking aside a pile of Ellen's old quilts. "It's here! I can feel it!" "You're right," I said quietly. "It is there. But it's not under the floorboards." I walked to the mantel and reached behind the heavy oak clock Ellen had won at a silent auction 3 decades ago. I pressed a small, recessed button that I hadn't touched since the day I'd updated my will. With a low, mechanical hum, a panel in the side of the chimney slid open. Inside wasn't a mountain of gold or stacks of bearer bonds. There was only a single, weathered leather-bound ledger and a small, digital recording device. Brianna dropped the drill. She scrambled toward the mantel, her hands clawing at the opening. "Give it to me! That's it! The offshore accounts!" "Take it," I said, stepping back. She snatched the ledger, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. But as she read, the triumph in her eyes began to curdle into confusion. The pages weren't filled with bank numbers or routing codes. They were filled with names, dates, and amounts of money paid out. January 1996, Thomas Vance, $50,000, legal fees. Bail June 1999, Thomas Vance, $75,000, gambling debt settlement. September hangin lernam, Thomas Vance, $1,000, private investigator, identity scrubbing. "What is this?" Brianna whispered, her voice cracking. "That's the record of how much it cost to keep your father out of prison for the first 20 years of your life," I said. "Arthur didn't leave a fortune for his heirs. He left a debt of shame. I didn't steal your inheritance, Brianna. I paid it off. Every cent you think I stole was spent keeping the Vance name from being synonymous with murderer." "Murderer?" Logan's voice came from the doorway. He was standing there with Samuel and Meredith. I looked at Meredith, who nodded solemnly. "Your father didn't just accidentally kill Arthur's daughter in a car wreck, Brianna," I said. "He was the one who tampered with the brakes on her car because she'd found out he was embezzling from the shipping firm. He killed his own sister for money. Arthur knew. That's why he gave me the safe key. He wanted to make sure Thomas never saw a dime of that blood money." Brianna looked at the ledger, then at Meredith. The world she had built, the narrative of the righteous heir seeking justice, was dissolving like salt in the rain. "No," she breathed. "No," he said. "He said Martin was the villain. He said whatever he had to say to make sure you'd do exactly what you've done tonight," Samuel said, stepping into the room. He used his own daughter to finish a grudge from the grave. But Brianna wasn't done. Desperation is a powerful fuel. She looked at the recording device in the hidden compartment. "Then what's that? If there's no money, what are you protecting?" "That," I said, "is the confession your father made to a priest 24 hours before he died. He sent it to me because he knew I was the only one who would keep his secret to protect you. He didn't want you to know you were the daughter of a fratricide." I reached out and pressed the play button. The voice that came out was thin, wheezing, and filled with the rattle of a dying man. "Martin, I'm going. I told the girl you were the one. I told her to take the house. I wanted her to hurt you like Arthur hurt me. But the truth is, I killed Sarah's mother. I killed her for a bank account that was already empty. Don't let Brianna become like me, Martin. Don't let her." The recording cut off. Brianna sank to her knees in the middle of the ruined living room. The white lace of her dress was torn, her hands were black with soot, and the family legacy she had fought for was revealed to be nothing but a stack of receipts for her father's sins. I didn't know it yet. I thought, watching her collapse, but the final twist wasn't about the past. It was about what she'd done in the present to ensure she'd never be caught. Suddenly, the sound of several car doors slamming echoed from the driveway. Red and blue lights began to pulse against the walls of the living room. The police? Logan asked, looking at Samuel. I didn't call them, Samuel said, his hand going back to his weapon. I did, Brianna whispered, a terrifying, jagged smile spreading across her face as she looked up from the floor. I called them 30 minutes ago. I told them that a confused old man and his violent brother-in-law had kidnapped Vance Hare and were holding her hostage in her own home. She stood up, smoothing her ruined dress. The broken bride was gone. The predator was back. You think a recording of a dead man is going to save you? She spat. I have the legal guardianship. I have the deed claim. And right now, I have the victim status. By the time you explain all this to a judge, the house will be sold, the accounts will be drained, and you'll be behind a plexiglass wall in a psych ward. She walked toward the front door, her head held high. Watch me, she whispered as she passed Logan. But as she reached for the handle, the door didn't just open, it was kicked in. A team of men in dark jackets with federal agent, stenciled in yellow across the back, stormed in. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at Samuel. They walked straight to Brianna and forced her against the wall. Brianna Cole, or should I say, Brianna Miller? The lead agent asked. You're under arrest for interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and the attempted murder of Dr. Eris Thorne. Brianna's scream was cut short as the handcuffs ratcheted shut. Murder? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. What are you talking about? She didn't just forge the doctor's signature for the guardianship, Martin, Carla said, stepping into the room, her phone held high. She tried to make sure he'd never be able to testify that it was a forgery. She hired someone to handle him in London, but she was using a burner phone that was tied to a credit card she'd skimmed from your estate. I looked at Brianna. She was shaking, her face pressed against the wallpaper. The invisible man had been playing one game, but the janitor had been playing another. I didn't know it yet. I realized, but the house wasn't the only thing that was rigged. My entire estate was a digital minefield, and she just stepped on every single one. But as they led her out, Logan turned to me, his eyes filled with a new, terrifying question. Dad, he whispered, if she's not a Vance, and Arthur's daughter is dead, then whose birth certificate did you say was in the safe? The one that proves she's the daughter of the man who killed Arthur's girl? I looked at Meredith. I looked at the ledger. It's not hers, Logan, I said, the final secret finally reaching the surface. It's yours. The world went silent. The silence that followed my words wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking the very air out of the room until my lungs ached. Logan stood paralyzed, his hand suspended in midair as if he were trying to catch a falling glass that had already shattered. He looked at me, then at the weathered leather ledger, then at Meredith, who had turned her face away, unable to meet his eyes. What do you mean, it's mine? Logan's voice was a ghost, a thin, rattling thing. Dad, what are you saying? I'm a Cole. I'm your son. I looked at him, and for the first time in 69 years, I let the invisible man stay hidden and let the father speak. I walked over to the ruined fireplace and reached into the hollowed-out space behind the mantel. I pulled out a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax that had gone brittle with age. I didn't hand it to him. I held it against my chest, feeling the weight of 30 years of lies. Ellen and I wanted a child more than we wanted breath, I said, my voice thick with the kind of grief that never truly leaves you. But the doctors told us it wasn't in the cards. And then came that Tuesday in Mtngin Chin Tram Chin Mui born, the day Arthur Vance died. But he didn't just give me a key to a safe that day, Logan. He gave me a choice. I looked at Meredith. She finally turned back, her eyes brimming with tears. Thomas had a son, Meredith whispered, her voice trembling. A boy he'd fathered with a woman he'd broken and discarded. He didn't want the boy. He saw him as a liability, a mouth to feed, a witness to the darkness he carried. He was going to leave that baby in a state-run ward and never look back. Arthur knew, I continued, looking back at Logan. He knew Thomas would raise that boy to be a monster just like him. He knew that bloodline was cursed by greed and violence. So, Arthur made a deal. He told me that if I took the baby, if I raised him as my own, far away from the Vance name and the Vance money, he would give me the resources to build a life where that boy would never have to know where he came from. He wanted to break the chain. Logan staggered back, his hip hitting the edge of the dining table. So, I'm a Vance? I'm Thomas's son? The man who killed Arthur's daughter? He's my father? No, I said, my voice ringing out with a sudden, fierce strength. He was your donor. I am your father. Ellen was your mother. We gave you our name, our sweat, and every ounce of love we had so you wouldn't have to carry the weight of a murderer's soul. We chose the invisible life, Logan, not just to hide the money, but to hide you from the vultures who would have used your birthright to tear you apart. I stepped forward, and finally handed him the envelope. "That's your original birth certificate. It's the proof that Brianna was looking for." She knew Thomas had a son. She didn't know that son was the man she'd spent 2 years seducing. A strangled, horrific sound escaped Logan's throat. It wasn't a sob. It was the sound of a man's soul being shredded. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he had married, the woman who had shared his bed and his dreams, was his own half-sister. Brianna hadn't just been hunting a fortune. She had committed the ultimate taboo in her blind, obsessive pursuit of a house made of wood and stone. She knew, Logan whispered, his eyes wide and vacant. She had to have known. She didn't care, Samuel said from the doorway, his voice like cold iron. To a woman like Brianna, people aren't family, they're assets. She figured if she married the heir, she'd have a legal lock on the estate that no court could ever break. She was willing to burn every moral bridge in existence to get what she thought she deserved. Outside, the sirens were fading as the federal agents drove Brianna away, but the wreckage she left behind was total. Logan sank to the floor, the birth certificate fluttering from his hand like a dead leaf. He looked at the shattered photos of Ellen, the woman who had held him when he had nightmares, the woman who had taught him how to skip stones on the very lake that was now the center of a blood feud. I didn't know it yet. I thought, watching my son break. But the hardest part of the revenge wasn't the arrest. It was the truth. The next few hours were a blur of legal maneuvers and whispered conversations. Carla was on the phone with the district attorney, ensuring that the guardianship order was not just vacated but incinerated. Samuel was coordinating with his federal contacts to trace the skunk money Brianna had moved. Meredith sat on the porch, staring out at the water, finally free of the niece who had treated her like a hostage. But Logan didn't move from the floor. He sat in the middle of the ruined living room, surrounded by the ghosts of a life he no longer recognized. I sat down next to him, my old bones aching. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, the janitor and the hair, 2 men who had been defined by secrets they never asked for. "Dad?" Logan finally whispered, hours later, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the lake. "I'm here, son. Why didn't you tell me? When I started dating her, when things got serious. Why didn't you stop it?" I closed my eyes, the weight of my own failure pressing down on me. "Because I was a coward, Logan. I was so afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd look at me and see the man who stole you. I was afraid you'd see the janitor as a kidnapper instead of a father. I thought if I just kept being invisible, the past would stay invisible too. I was wrong. You can't bury the truth deep enough to keep it from thirsty roots." Logan turned to me then. His face was aged, the boyish charm gone, replaced by a hard, weary clarity. He reached out and took my hand, the hand that had mopped 10,000 floors and signed 100 property deeds. "You didn't steal me, Dad," he said, his voice finally steady. "You saved me. She was the one who tried to steal me. She tried to steal my soul." He stood up, pulling me with him. He looked around the room at the broken glass, the pried-up floorboards, and the empty hidden safe. "We're moving," Logan said. I blinked. "Moving? To where?" "Not to a facility," Logan said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "And not to a basement. We're selling this place, Dad. Every brick of it. We're selling the downtown properties, the storefronts, all of it. We're going to take the invisible coal fortune, and we're going to do what Arthur Vance never could. We're going to start something that isn't built on secrets." "What about the money?" I asked. "We'll keep enough to live," Logan said. "But the rest? We're going to set up a foundation. For kids like I was. For the ones who get left behind by men like Thomas. We'll call it the Ellen Cole legacy. Because she was the only one in this whole story who ever did anything just for love." I felt a tear finally break free, tracking down the wrinkle on my cheek. "She'd like that, Logan. She'd like that a lot." The final resolution didn't happen in a courtroom, and it didn't happen with a gavel. It happened 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday morning. Brianna was in a federal holding cell, facing 20 years for a list of crimes that grew every time the FBI opened one of her digital files. She had tried to strike a deal, tried to claim she was a victim of Thomas's indoctrination, but the recording of her discussing the drugging of her father-in-law was the final nail in her coffin. She would spend her youth in a cage, of Vance hair, with nothing but a concrete floor to call her own. Logan and I stood on the dock of the lake house one last time. The sold sign was hammered into the grass near the driveway. The new owners, a young family with 3 messy, loud children, were already moving boxes into the foyer. They didn't know the history of the house. They didn't know about the floor safe or the hidden confession. To them, it was just a beautiful place to grow up. I climbed into my old Ford truck. I'd had the engine rebuilt and the oil leak fixed. It didn't look like much, but it ran like a dream. Logan climbed into the passenger seat, his designer suit replaced by a simple flannel shirt and a pair of sturdy work boots. "You ready, Martin?" he asked, using my name for the first time with a wink. "Ready, Logan?" I said. I put the truck in gear, and we pulled out of the gravel driveway, leaving the lake and the invisible life behind us. We weren't rich men anymore, not in the way the world counts it. But as we drove toward the city to open the doors of the first Ellen Cole Youth Center, I realized that for the first time in 30 years, I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror and recognize the man looking back. I wasn't a janitor. I wasn't a millionaire. I wasn't a victim. I was a father. And that was the only legacy that ever mattered. The road ahead was long, and the scars would always be there, beneath the surface. But as the sun rose over the Maryland hills, I knew one thing for certain. The wolves were gone, and the woods were finally quiet. What happened next didn't just change my life. It gave me my son back. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, living a life that a monster like Thomas Vance could never understand. A life built on the truth.